Tell me, dear viewers, what would you do if you were invited around to someone's apartment, say, for dinner, and pretty soon after you arrived, in fact, upon arriving, you found them in the midst of a very heated argument. And then after that had died out, they proceeded to have sex in front of you. And then, after that, the lady, heavily pregnant, decided that she was going to give birth in her living room, all by herself. Again, right in front of you. What would you do in that situation? Well, thanks to Hara Kazuo, now you can find out. Ohayou gozaimasu, and welcome to my review of Second Run's brand new release of what has been for too long a little seen film. Its lack of general availability standing in marked contrast to its significance, both to its director, the aforementioned Hara Kazuo, and indeed its significance to Japanese cinema in general. Because building on Hara's first film, this was his second feature, it marked a decisive shift, a key sort of turning point in Japanese documentary filmmaking, one that would prove very significant, that would offer a vastly alternative model to the one that was then predominant, and that had really served to put Japanese non-fiction filmmaking on the international cinematic map. And that would also launch several careers and find its way slyly, at times surreptitiously, into quite a few different corners of Japanese cinema. So it's an overdue and a welcome release of what is a very, very difficult film. I say that in a positive sense. This is a film that is never easy to watch, but similarly is never less than thought-provoking. So prepare yourself if you've never seen it before. If you have, then it's time to revisit it. And I'm going to say a few words about its significance right now. So, Extreme Private Eros is a film about its director. It's a film about its director's relationship to the central character throughout, a woman named Miyuki, with whom Hara has been in a relationship, but from whom, as the film begins, he is in the process of separating. And it's also a film about itself. It's a film about its own construction of a relationship, of a female presence on screen, a male directorial presence, mostly off screen. And it's a film about us, the audience, and our reactions to what we see. As I said, the film begins with heated discussions between Miyuki on screen and Hara, who remains, apart from one cryptic moment, largely off screen. She is kind of breaking away from him. He is trying to keep her, and he says he made the film, or he's in the process of making the film, as an attempt to deal with his feelings for her, which may account for the subtitle Love Song 1974. The film was actually filmed over 2 years, from 72 to 74. Miyuki ups and leaves mainland Japan for Okinawa several times, where she enters into a relationship with a Black American GI, with whom she becomes pregnant, albeit this relationship doesn't last, and she endeavors to have and raise the child all by herself. She hangs around in and works as a dancer in a bar in Okinawa, and ultimately she has the child on screen in a very graphic and protracted, largely single shot, and she tries to adopt. She goes through the process of working at a kind of refuge for single mothers, a sort of commune, actually. And all the while, we have her justifications for what she's doing, her ripostes to Hara and to the woman with whom Hara forms a relationship in the wake of his breakup with Miyuki. And she and Hara maintain this sort of back and forth throughout, and there are also interspersed Hara's own thoughts and feelings and attitudes, which we hear rather than see him deliver. And we get a very uncomfortable 90 plus minutes of seeing someone's private life sort of opened up to a kind of unflinching, very private, yet at the same time public gaze. So Extreme Private Eros is a kind of very artfully artless film. It very much has the feeling of a kind of home movie, something that is, in its camera work, in its editing, very rough and ready, very ragged. There's even a moment when the camera goes completely out of focus for quite a long time. But this, I think, is part of the film's, I'm not going to say charm, but part of its effect and part of why it's an important film. Since World War II, Japanese documentary filmmaking had been sort of lauded over. It had been dominated by a few key figures who were making very socially grand and important works. People like Kame Fumio around the time of the Pacific War and just after, and then the titanic figures of Tsuchimoto Noriaki and Ogawa Shinsuke. The former began making a series of films about the famous Minamata disease, the famous case where a company was pouring waste into water and contaminated the water, and this led to an outbreak of a disease that has continued. In fact, Hara himself recently made a documentary about this, Minamata Mandala. And Ogawa Shinsuke and his Ogawa Pro collective made a series of films in the late 60s, early 70s about the sort of reaction against the building of a new airport. The way that the land was requisitioned from local farmers meant that they began a sort of physical protest, which soon descended into chaos and violence. This was Narita Airport. And over the course of several years and several films, Ogawa Pro documented this physical clash, this sort of ideological clash, and explored every facet of the opposition. the farmers' lives, their histories, and the attitudes of those in power. Hara, beginning with his first film, Goodbye CP, which is about cerebral palsy sufferers, and it's a very confrontational and disturbing work, began to offer very interior, very private, very personal visions. This he would continue through Extreme Private Eros and on to perhaps his most famous film from the 1980s, The Emperor's Naked Army Marches On. These are the three films, the tripartite, that cemented Hara's name, since he has dabbled in fiction films, films like The Many Faces of Chika to no great effect, and has returned, as I said, recently to documentary filmmaking. And he kind of pioneered this very individual, this very behind closed doors, very confrontational style. In a book that has been translated into English, he talks about his films as action documentaries. And by action, I think he means the sense of being sort of physically in a space, moving in a space. Werner Herzog has talked about this, about feeling out any location in which he's working. And Hara has this too, that sense of being bodily, physically located in a space, and kind of making that sense of being situated in a space part of the narrative, part of the meaning. He's not often present in his films in front of the camera, as Tsuchimoto and Ogawa both were, but he does authorially dominate, and there is a constant sense of him interacting and engaging with those around him, and that's essentially what we see in Extreme Private Eros. As I said, I think it's about us. It's up to us to consider how exploitative the film may or may not be, how comfortable we may or may not be watching it. The constant presence of children around the film is a kind of elephant in the room, if you like. There's barely a scene without fairly young children sort of pottering around the fringes. This comes into focus more in the latter parts of the film, but still you get a very disturbing sense that there's a kind of performative sense to what's happening, both from Miyuki and I think from Hara, that this is a very, despite its raw emotional sort of unfettered, unconstructed, unedited, unexpurgated feeling, there is a sense that this is quite performative, that what we are seeing and hearing is somehow a kind of performance, a kind of demonstration of something. And the presence of children is a kind of sort of almost like a Greek chorus that is communicating to us perhaps the weight of this performance and perhaps the costs of this performance. So this is a very, as I said, disturbing film, perhaps not quite as challenging as Goodbye CP, and not as likely to facilitate a kind of bemused curiosity as does The Emperor's Naked Army Marches On. But it is in some ways Hara's key film, a touchstone film in his career. So it's definitely one to watch. I can't say you will enjoy it as such, but I think if you have any interest in Japanese non-fiction, and the subjects such as the ethics of documentary filmmaking, which have been explored quite a lot recently in discourse, then this certainly is a film that you can't miss. Okay, I hope you found this review useful. Like, comment and subscribe, please, or don't. Follow me on X, AdamBingham01, or online at culturaljapan.com, and stay tuned for much more in the near future. Goodbye for now.